welcome back to our regular viewers. This is Wednesday Night Sessions. I am still the host, Mitch Nobis. I was just making a joke that I am not Terry Gross, although I think everybody here would be happier if I was Terry Gross. No, I am but lowly Mitch Nobis, the host of Wednesday Night Sessions, our regular ongoing reading series brought to us from KickstART Farmington in Farmington, Michigan. I haven't given them a shout out in a while, so shout out to Dwayne Hayes, the executive director, who originally had the idea for this whole fandango. So thanks again to Dwayne. Haven't seen him in a while. Stupid pandemic. Someday we'll all see each other again, my people. I'm excited. Joining us today is Shannon McLeod. As our regular viewers know, we are a Michigan-based show, and we usually focus on Metro Detroit or Michigan writers, although we've taken advantage of going online during the pandemic to bring in people from across the country. And Shannon fits like all of those categories, like a checkbox, like grew up in Metro Detroit, and is now a Michigan expatriate, of whom there are many, many Michigan expatriates. And this is also a fun one because Shannon and I also know each other from outside the Wednesday Night Sessions universe. We occasionally do a writing group thing together that Shannon started. So she's an A+ awesome person from various angles. So I'm excited to have Shannon with us here today. She also has a book, Whimsy, coming out in March, and I believe she's going to be reading to us from that. So at this point, I will toss it over to you, Shannon. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Mitch. So yes, as Mitch mentioned, I'm reading from a book that's coming out called Whimsy. It is a novella, including some linked stories that have been published in Joyland, Necessary Fiction, and Malarkey books. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to read from the book. So the book is about the main character named Whimsy, who is a teacher who's struggling with some traumas from the past. She was in a car accident in college that killed her roommate and left her somewhat disfigured. So the story begins with an interview where she's being interviewed by a journalist for the Free Press. I don't call it the Detroit Free Press, but that's how I imagine it. I am from Oak Park, grew up in Oak Park and Ferndale area, lived in Ann Arbor the last 10 years before moving to Charlottesville in 2017. Those things aren't related to the book, but anyway, so Whimsy is a middle school teacher. So you see her kind of struggling with her first year of teaching and all of the humiliations that come along with teaching middle school, which I'm personally familiar with. And the story begins where she meets the journalist who's interviewing her, and they strike up a sort of romance that is only somewhat requited. So I'll begin from chapter 1 of Whimsy. I know how human interest pieces work. I know the series of emotions these stories take you through. Initial horror at the incident and the accompanying images, then gratitude that the same did not happen to you, and finally, inspiration that the subject lives on, as though simply existing were cause for admiration. The journalist sat me beside my living room window. He said the lighting was perfect. I imagined the sunlight casting shadows along my scars. The burns on my face and neck created ridges I did my best to fill in with foundation. But the wrong angle revealed every line. He discovered that angle. I wasn't sure what sort of expression to make. Despite my nerves, my natural inclination was to smile for a picture. Once he lifted the camera, I remembered the type of article the photo would accompany, and I relaxed my mouth, squinted my eyes. He directed me to look into the far corner of the room, sitting up straight. Straighter, please. I suppose he wanted me to look stoic, brave. Afterwards, he helped me move the chair and coffee table back. I put my hand on his forearm and asked if he'd like to stay for coffee. He hesitated before saying yes. I wasn't sure if he was considering whether it was a fake offer, asked out of politeness, or if he was feeling conflicted. I can usually spot the look of internal struggle when someone intends to be gentle to a person who is different, but not so gentle that it is obvious they are acting disingenuously. I decided he probably didn't want to stay, but he allowed his guilt to prevail. Maybe he hesitated out of the fear that I might be coming on to him. I once had the luxury of negotiating attraction, of worrying I'd hurt another person's feelings. When an overweight classmate in high school asked me to come over for dinner after we stayed late at school working on a physics project, I made up an excuse. I wanted to be friends with him. He was the funniest kid in school, but the risk of leading him on if he wanted to be more than friends was more discomfort than I was willing to risk. Thinking back, I'm unsure whether I was more concerned about his discomfort or mine. After my accident, the world grew incrementally more polite. Maybe I was coming onto the journalist, or I would have if he hadn't become so strange as we sat at my kitchen table with our coffee. Petrology is the area where I'm, most interested right now, but I don't need to figure out my focus until next year, and it'll really depend on the lab opportunities. It all depends on a lot, so yeah. Rakesh rambled on about his geology classes for his master's degree. We lived in Metro Detroit, where rock formations weren't exactly abundant. What's the point? I asked. I wanted to know, and I also wanted to break him from his monologue. It was starting to grate on me that he was talking at me like this, like I was his senile grandmother who couldn't form a coherent response. I'd just given him an interview. He knew I could talk. Of course, during the interview, he'd had his camera and laptop to distract him. He didn't have to look at me for sustained periods of time. What do you mean? He looked up at my face for 1-2 seconds. I mean, why study geology? Because I like rocks. He smiled like it was cute that I was such an idiot. I thought he was attractive when he first appeared at my apartment door. He had good bone structure, a wide jaw, and he stood tall. We were close to the same age. He might have been a few years older, late 20s or early 30s. But now, as he fumbled with my salt and pepper shakers and took tiny sips of his coffee in nervous succession, he began to appear pitiful, his character thin. I noticed the way his hair clumped in defined gelled streaks. Now he's talking about an archaeology camp he went to as a kid. I must have spaced out as he'd transitioned from discussing his classes to his childhood. His preferred topic of conversation was undermining his initial masculine impression. The muffled sound of a vacuum cleaner came up from beneath the floorboards. What's that? He asked. There's a vacuum store downstairs. I got up and dumped the last of my coffee into the sink, cleared his mug off of the table. I forgot I told my mom I'd take her to an appointment, I said. Rakesh nodded with polite understanding. He pushed back his chair, and it made a scraping noise against the linoleum. He thanked me. He looked me in the eyes this time. I gave a half smile in return. A while after he left, I called my mom. We talked on the phone every day since she moved away to Lansing to live with her new girlfriend, Barb. Soon, The Walking Dead was coming on. We always watched it together with our phones at our sides set on speaker. As she told me about her day, I examined my face in the mirror. My foundation had nearly vanished. I touch my face when I'm nervous, and it must have happened during the interview. I could see my skin, the streaks of dark beige and reddish white braided along my cheek. Frustrated, I pounded the cabinet beside the mirror. My mom didn't seem to hear the sound. She asked me what I was eating for dinner. I took a slow breath and wiped my eyes. I hadn't had anything to eat since breakfast. I went to the fridge and examined its contents. Bread, cheese, orange juice. The only produce left was a half a lemon and a quarter of an onion, both in their own little baggies. I opened the cupboard and selected some cream of potato. Once it was heating on the stove, I sat down on the couch. Mom was talking about Barb's watercolor class. I heard a beep interrupt her, and I looked at my phone on the counter. It was Rakesh. I told my mom I'd call her back and answered him. By now the soup was boiling, so I ran to turn off the burner. He spoke in that rapid-fire ramble he used when talking about himself over coffee. He said something about not having thanked me enough. I assured him it was fine. I lied and said I was happy to do it. Then he asked me to dinner. I shoved the pot of soup in the refrigerator. I texted my mom to tell her I had to answer more questions and I wouldn't be able to watch the show. If I insinuated anything approximating a date, she'd be texting and calling all night. I hadn't been on a date since Mary set me up with her cousin, an amputee. We had so much in common, she'd said. I didn't discover he was missing a hand until I arrived at the brewery. We ordered several flights of beer. I nodded enthusiastically as he told me more than I wanted to know about the difference between Scotch ales, porters, and stouts. Information I immediately forgot. I got drunk and embarrassingly giddy. I thought he was drunk too, so I figured it was okay. The next day when I talked to Miri, who had already debriefed with her cousin, she reported he had called me a budding alcoholic. I remembered how tender I had felt towards him as I watched him struggle to open his wallet at the end of the date, fingers clutching one flap of leather while his stump pulled away at the other. What an asshole. I looked through my closet for something suitable. I wondered if it would be strange if I was wearing a different outfit when he picked me up. For the interview, I had dressed in slacks and a nice button-down shirt. If this were clearly a date, I would have permission to put on a dress, but I didn't know if it was a date. I decided to split the difference. I put on my black collared shirt and traded my pants for a skirt cut just above the knee. In the bathroom, I applied a thick layer of foundation, blush, and powder. I still had half an hour until he would arrive. As the minutes passed, I paced my apartment. Each time I walked through my bedroom, I put on another piece of jewelry. By the time he texted to say he was waiting out back, I jingled as I walked down the stairs. Rakesh took me to one of those hibachi restaurants. I noticed when I got in his car that he was wearing the same t-shirt but had replaced his puffy winter coat with a corduroy blazer. It felt somewhat serendipitous that we had both partially modified our outfits. During the car ride, I asked him if his boss made him do it, if the editor told him he had failed to ask all of the most important questions, the personal ones. He failed to connect in the emotional way that a journalist must connect with his subject, especially if that subject was in an accident that killed 2 others, and the subject was the only one to escape alive. He failed to ask how it felt to walk around with evidence of that night all over her body. I just really wanted to show my appreciation for your time, he said as he opened the door for me. The hostess asked if we wanted to sit at a grill or a private table. Grill would be fun, wouldn't it? He must have been asking me, but he addressed the question to the hostess. He rubbed the spot beneath his lower lip like he was stroking a soul patch he didn't have. I looked at the group seated around the grills. On the other side of the room was the bar, surrounded by booths, which had curtains draped along their openings. I'd rather sit at a booth. I didn't think I could handle worrying about the other occupants at the table staring at me while simultaneously navigating a conversation with Rakesh. He asked me about what it was like to be a teacher. I told him I didn't have much to compare it to, but that it seemed I had less free time and less money than people with other careers. I was happy when he didn't respond with any platitudes about it being rewarding. I was supposed to be teaching English in Africa right now, actually. He draped his napkin over his lap. Oh? My ex and I were planning on going into the Peace Corps together, but you have to be married if you want to be placed in the same country with someone. He opened his menu, as if that were the end of the story. I looked at the dinner specials while I considered whether to push for more. I couldn't concentrate on the words in front of me until I asked, "So why didn't you get married?" He lowered his menu just enough to show his eyes. She didn't want to marry me. Then he raised the laminated page back up to hide his face entirely. He asked how I felt about dumplings. I told him I felt very warmly towards them. When the waitress returned, he ordered the dumplings appetizer and a pina colada. I ordered a sake martini and promised myself it would be my sole drink of the evening. So that's just a bit of the first chapter of the book Whimsy. So it's a novella that's coming out from Long Day Press at the end of March.
Awesome. Shannon, thank you very much for reading. So again, that's from the first chapter of Whimsy coming out in March. And that leads me actually really nicely right into my first question, because where you left off was a scene that was just deep with character stuff. And obviously I haven't read Whimsy yet because it's not out, but I've read some of your other stuff online, and it strikes me that you're really good at, your writing is really full of character in kind of tightly knit short spaces. You tend to write short pieces, but in only a few pages, like, you really feel like you know this person. And in what you just read, like I already feel like I know or have known people like this. Like you're doing a really good job at capturing character, which leads me to a question. Most people on this show in this season, especially, have been poets. So the craft question has been a lot about poetry. So I want to ask you a craft question about fiction then. How do you know when it's done? Like these such richly developed characters, like how do you know when to move on and stop inviting us into this person's brain? And yeah, I don't know. How do you know when it's done?
Well, with my short fiction, I find that is easier to determine than like novel length projects. Um, Novel length projects, I guess it's just like keep writing till it's book length. Although with this book, it's a novella, and I initially wrote this about 5 years ago. I wrote the bulk of it about 5 years ago. And in the following years, it was supposed to come out with one small press, and then they folded. And then I was submitting to agents and other presses, and agents told me, you should try to make this into a novel. Novellas don't sell. This is no secret. So I really I thought about how to make it longer, and then I just, with the story and the characters, it was done, I felt. And anything that I would add would feel forced. With short fiction, I think that usually when I have an idea, I have the sense as to whether it's flash or it's short story length. I think just based upon where the idea comes from and how developed it is. Usually, if I think my flash fiction comes a little bit more closely from real life and moments where I have some sort of realization related to a mundane situation or interaction. And so I jokingly referred to my stories as borecore recently because
Disagree, but go ahead.
I feel like a lot of my flash fiction is really like, it's kind of like boring little moments, but then those are the little moments that you find meaning and realizations about life from. So I think when I have those own moments in my own life, that tends to translate to flash fiction. Whereas if I'm thinking about a situation, more of a conflict, and have an idea of characters that I want to see moving in the world, that ends up being short, typical length short stories, or working them into a novel or longer project.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, my lead in on the question, I don't think it's borecore. Like I get really drawn into these characters. Like I think it's a strength in your writing, and I love writing that does that, the put you in other people's kind of mindsets and in their shoes, so to speak. So
oh, thank you. I like that too. So I'm drawn to things that I think others might label as borecore. If borecore was a term, maybe it will be now.
well, it started here. Yeah, you get the credit. I love it. I love it. Then for the second question, let's loop back around, because I think you are the first guest on this show that is a former Michigander, neither current nor never, but a former. So let's and we're still in the middle of the pandemic, right? It's as we record this, it's midwinter, 2021. So we can't do things yet, but when we can, and you get to come back to Michigan, what do you miss? Like, what would you do if you could come back to Michigan right now? Like, what's good about Michigan?
Oh, that's such a good question, because I've thought about it so much, and there's so many things that I miss about Michigan. Oh no, I hope I don't cry.
Sorry.
I really miss Lake Huron.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things because as I mentioned, my last 10 years I was living in Ann Arbor, so I really miss Literati bookstore and Bookbound bookstore in Ann Arbor, and I miss the art museum in Ann Arbor and Seva and the lunchroom. There's so many restaurants in Michigan that I don't know that I love and miss. I strangely didn't think I would miss Leo's Coney Island as much as I do, but I miss Leo's so much.
Yeah. Oh man.
and just Coney Islands in general. So yeah, it's a lot of just the places that I have a lot of nostalgia attached to. But I also find even living in Virginia, as I have been for, I guess it's been 3.5 years now, the people that I tend to connect to and make friends with are also Midwesterners.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think there is something that is a little bit ineffable about Midwesternness and like the I guess Midwest nice really is a thing. Or just I don't know, it's like kind of it feels like two sides of the same coin of like people from Michigan are very like have sort of a dark sense of humor and are very like welcoming and friendly, and I feel like want to be your friend. Of course, this is vast generalizations, of course, but you know, I think that you get something out of having such harsh, horrible winters.
Yeah.
I'm ready to say it builds character, and I hate that phrase attached to like bad experiences. But I mean, there is something I feel like about the winters in Michigan and in Southeast Michigan that kind of like lead you to go into yourself and be more internal. And I think that helps develop what you need as a writer and also makes you appreciate the sun a lot more and seeing people and the summer and the lakes. I miss the Great Lakes a lot.
Yeah, they're impossible to replace and impossible to describe. Like, I mean, you're from here. I'm sure you had people not from Michigan come visit and see the lake for the first time, and like they can't understand that it's a lake. Like,
yeah, this is what a lake is. This is what I know a lake to be.
You know, those other things are ponds. Like, this is a lake.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's such a good answer. That was fantastic. Yeah, and for people who haven't been to Ann Arbor, like I totally feel that too. Like I went to school there, and we're close enough that we go there when the world is open. We would go there all the time. Like Literati is our bookstore. So yeah, I do.
There's a lot about Metro Detroit I miss too, though. Like I think the cuisine is like we have such great like Middle Eastern cuisine and other types of cuisine that you can't really get in Central Virginia. And shout out to Pinwheel Bakery, is so good in Ferndale. I miss that place too.
Yeah, I miss a lot of places, man. I still live here, and your answer is
right. Yeah.
Yeah. To wistfulness, I guess. There you go. Well, anyways, thank you very much, Shannon, for joining us. Again, Whimsy coming out in March. This episode might be coming out right around when the book is out, so look for it. If not, pre-order. And thanks again for joining us today. We have an audience member off screen here saying hello, everyone. Anyways, Shannon, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Well, to the regular viewers, we'll see you again next time.